Yo, 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 welcome to Dollars and Cents for Frugal Freddy, where we have real money talk with a human touch. Make sure you like and subscribe to get the latest episode of the pod. Today, I have a very special guest, Ashon McKenzie. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I love it.
Yes, man. We've been trying to get this on the docket for a while. I think this conversation around estate planning is very, very essential to everyone's needs that's trying to build legacy. But before we jump in, can you tell the people a little bit more about your story, your background, how you got into law and legal work?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the opportunity. So I started off my career graduating from Notre Dame Law School.
Okay.
As soon as I finished at Notre Dame, I moved to Columbus, Ohio. And the first time I did anything associated with estate planning was volunteering to help somebody out with a will. And that kind of got me started on the journey. It was a while until I got into estate planning officially, but that got me started. From there, I started my career off as an assistant attorney general.
Okay.
I was representing state entities in the highest courts of the land. I switched gears a little bit and was representing colleges and universities like Ohio State and other colleges and universities around the state.
That's awesome.
I was deputy legal counsel to the Ohio Senate for a time and was there representing the leadership in the State House. And then I got the bug to try to work on children's issues.
That's
So
awesome.
I started lobbying for the Children's Defense Fund as their policy director for a couple of years. And that from there, I made the switch into some private practice work.
Awesome.
So I was doing work with a boutique estate planning law firm. Estate planning was the center of the work that they did. And at the same time, I was doing a little bit of work with the city of Columbus to support efforts in infant and maternal health.
Awesome.
And when the firm I was doing some work with decided that they were taking some additional steps forward, I thought it's my time to take some additional steps forward. And so I launched my firm, McKenzie Law LLC. And so at this stage, I've helped lots and lots of people protect at this stage, tens of millions of dollars.
That's awesome.
To preserve for themselves, for their families, the people they love, the causes they care about.
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
No, man, hey, that's a very impressive resume. And I think the work you're doing is God's work.
Yeah, thanks.
You see a lot of things out there in the social media world, legacy, estate planning, like all wills, trusts, power of attorneys, and, words are just thrown out there and like, what does that even mean? So in your words, what is exactly estate planning and why is it important?
Yeah. So I'm an attorney, so I can give you a complicated answer or a simple one. And I'll
Whatever
give
answer
you
you want
simple
to
one
give.
first.
Break it down to us, man.
All right. So the simple version is estate planning essentially is putting together a roadmap for what happens with your wealth after you're gone, right? It's a way to protect and preserve the things that you have and to make sure that the people you love and care about are going to be okay and that there's a plan in place for them no matter what happens, right? That's the really simple thing, right? Now, everyone, like you said, everyone talks about generational wealth and all these things, but no one talks about the tools, the means by which you can make generational wealth happen.
Yes.
And so we try to think about, it's sort of like this. I think about estate planning, it's sort of like having a place to live, right? A place to live, everybody needs one, right? There are some basic elements that any place that someone lives has to have. Right. So you need walls to protect yourself from the elements. You need a roof inside the house. You need a way to, cool down when it's hot, warm up when it's cold, place to sleep, a kitchen, place to make food, essential elements that need to be part of every place to live. Well, sort of similarly in the estate planning realm, there's some things that you always need to be there, right? You need the vehicle that's going to transfer your assets, right? A lot of times for us, we want to make sure that's a trust so that that family member in the future won't have to go through the probate process.
Yes.
You won't normally want to have powers of attorney in place, right? If there's an emergency, there's a way to take care of things and keep the bills paid and take care of your health. You want a living will, right? These are the things that we want to make sure we have in most plans. The thing is, we have to do a little bit of tailoring, right?
Yes.
So, appropriate place to live when I was a single man. I could go in an efficiency apartment. I could, set up shop and be pretty happy there.
Yeah.
Now, as a husband and father of four, right? And, my wife and I, we work from home a lot, right? We need a place that can accommodate those sorts of things, right? We need a little bit larger foundation. We need rooms for the kids to run around. We need some office space so we can sit in and get some work done from home, right? And same thing with your estate plan, right? You need to make sure that it's customized and built and designed for your life, your stage, the things that are important to you.
Yeah. And I love how you broke that down. Like, and I'm all about, people on the show probably heard me talk about this, the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And I like how you broke it down like, hey, it's a house. You need your walls, you need your, your ceilings, you need all the things that makes your legacy house a thing.
Yeah.
And even with that, like, how early should someone start to think about estate planning, or even just starting the journey altogether?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of like this, right? Like, how soon should you plant a tree, right? The best time to plant a tree is like 20 years ago, right? The second best time to plant it is right now, right?
Wow.
So, for people to get estate planning done, realistically, you should start as soon as you're beginning your adult life. That's when estate planning should happen, right? You'll need a certain type of plan and certain tools as you begin, and some different things that are different when you're starting off life versus when you're retiring, right? Different sorts of things we need to think about. But the honest thing is this: most people start to think about estate planning in a few different times. People start thinking about estate planning when they get married, they have a child, they buy a house. I'll be honest, a lot of the clients that we have come to us after they've experienced a major health crisis. A couple of years ago, someone that they loved, a parent, a spouse, a sibling passed away. They had to go through the pain of going through the loss on top of going through the probate process. And they think, I don't want anyone else in my family to have to go through that. The surgery is coming up and the doctor's telling them they should, think about making sure everything is in order. A lot of folks come to us in those circumstances as well. And so the honest answer is the right time to do estate planning is right now.
No, and I love how you say that, because there are different life moments that trigger, let me think about this. And I know for myself, I went through a divorce. I'm like, hey, I need a will and a trust and a power of attorney. All those words I've been hearing. Yeah. I'm like, I need that right now just to protect, what I have, what my daughter has, and what my future has. So I love how you say, hey, if it's either married, even single, to be honest with you. Single, married, widow, all those different life events that may come up. So even with that, you kind of touched on this a little bit. So what are some of those tools that someone would need to get the process really started and ramped up?
Yeah, great question. All right, so there's some essential tools, right? Fundamental things that we think about for every estate plan. So our firm refers to them as the core four, right? So the first thing is you need a vehicle that is going to help pass along your assets. While for us, like 95% of the people we encounter, it's really appropriate for them to set up a trust. Okay. Right. Trust, legal entity that can own and hold your assets, allows for your assets to pass to someone else without going through the probate process, gives you a lot of control over it during your lifetime. Right. So for a lot of people, a trust is a really appropriate tool. Next, we normally pop in what we call your pour over will. Right? Okay. I know a lot of people are like, do I need a will? Do I need a trust? You might realistically need both. And so, the pour over will is really there as it's like a backup policy for your trust. Okay. If something doesn't somehow make it into your trust, then you have your will to catch it and pour it back into your trust.
That's why they call that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have that. Then we think normally about your powers of attorney.
Okay.
Right. So financial power of attorney, it's like your designated driver. If you are incapacitated, then you want to make sure that someone can step into the driver's seat on your finances, continue to make sure that the bills are paid, that Uncle Sam gets his piece of the pie, that the things that you need to have going continue on, and that when you're back in a good position, that nothing is disrupted. Same thing for your healthcare. So we set up a healthcare power of attorney. Okay. Want to make sure if you can't communicate to your health professionals, that someone you know and love who cares about you can. And finally, we normally put together a living will so that if you're ever in a terminal condition, that you can communicate to your health professionals what type of care you want, what type of care you don't. Okay. So those are what we call the core four, right?
Can you repeat the four again?
Yeah. So trust, pour over will, powers of attorney, living will, right? Those are foundational things. And then we start building off from there. So, and it's really tailored and specific to what things are important to you in your life. So if you're a parent of a child with special needs, we need to build on the room for you that is going to take care. We need special need planning for them, right? If you are, say you're a doctor and you're in a profession where people want to sue you more often, right? We need to take a few more steps to protect your assets and insulate you, right? If you happen to own a variety of rental properties, right? We need to make sure that those pieces are in place that are going to give you the appropriate level of protection, make it easy to pass along. And so we're tailoring things based on the important things in your life, your goals, the asset types, the amounts. Yeah, we're doing a lot of tailoring.
That's awesome. I'm gonna share a quick story. I remember when we met years ago, but I remember when we reconnected, you hit me up on Facebook like, hey, and I didn't know you were a state attorney. Like, say, hey man, and I had a Budget and Brews. I had this idea of having a Budget and Brews event around estate planning, and really didn't think no one was interested into it, like the topic. But to be honest, we did that in November of 2023. And that was probably the most people that came to any of those events. And I'm like, man, like people really care about this stuff. And I remember when we linked up for breakfast one morning and we talked for about 2 hours about, to your point, like customizing your plan. Every plan is not the same. And I think that's one thing out there in the social media world where people don't talk about, like, it's the flashy words, but how can I tailor my estate plan to my family and my individual wants and needs? And I love that approach that you and your staff takes with their clients.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate that. I mean, I get a lot of people who start off coming to me and everyone says, my thing is really simple, right? And then they start talking to me about all the parts and pieces of their life and their family. And as we get into it, it's like, okay, well, like, you have 3 kids, you're concerned that one might have like an issue or challenge that you need to, help them through. You have these assets that you thought weren't very many, but hey, you know what? Like we want a specific thing for that one. And this one's really important. And, let's make sure, you have a timeshare in Florida. Okay, well, we need to take like an additional step to make sure that that's protected appropriately, right? It's, making sure that we really understand.
Before we hop into the next topic, I do want you to kind of go back and define what a will, what a trust, what a power of attorney. Because I think even me, immediately so, like, I don't always understand the difference between all those. I think I know a little bit more what a power of attorney is, but can you explain that a little bit in simple terms?
Sure. So I'll start off with a will, right? So a will is a document where you let other people know what you want to have happen with your stuff, okay? That's all it really is. It's just you saying, this is what I want to happen with my things. For that reason, a lot of people think they're gonna, write their will that they won't, everything is all set and buttoned up, and then they're surprised when their family has to go through the probate process. But all it is you telling people what you want to have happen. Once you do that, then a whole process gets set in motion. A trust is sort of like a will, but more extensive. So a trust really is a legal entity that you create. And so that entity can hold and own your things, and you can place assets into it. You can take assets out of it. You can move the assets within it all sorts of different ways. It gives you a lot more control over your things. I was talking with somebody the other day, and I gave this analogy, which was think about a will kind of like an old car. Right? An old used car, right? It can get you from point A to point B, right? But it's usually a little bit slower than a new car. You might think you're going to get a real deal on it because it might not look like it costs as much on the beginning, but then you end up with a lot of costs on the end with repairs and things like that. Well, same thing with the will. You think you're going to get yourself a little deal in the beginning, and then the family has to go to probate. They're paying an attorney like me to represent them through the process. They're putting up a bond with the probate court to get the process started. And then it takes longer. Usually, a typical probate is like 1 to 2 years. Versus a trust, it's private. I can, be really customized with it. Instead of my kids getting one big lump sum at one point in time, I can say you get some at 25 and more at 30 when I think you're more responsible. Oh, and then more at 35 when I think you'd be more responsible for that. I get a lot of control.
That's awesome.
Powers of attorney. So a power of attorney is you designating someone to serve as your agent, your representative on your behalf in a certain circumstance. So for a financial power of attorney, it's you designating who can take care of your finances if you're not able to. right? So you set up, hey, such and such will be that person. And we normally try to write it really cleanly, really well, so that that person can do things like file your taxes, pay your bills, continue to pay for your insurance, life insurance policies, taking care and managing all of your financial affairs. Healthcare is the same thing. You set up a healthcare agent, and that person now can communicate with your health professionals, take a look at your medical records to help make decisions with your health professionals with you. And then finally, a living will is a document where you let your health professionals know what kind of care you would like to have and not have if you're in a terminal condition. So, you can designate exactly what you want to have happen there.
And all these plans is pretty evergreen. You can update them as you go throughout life, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we encourage people to do that.
Yeah.
Anytime they're having well, in a workplace setting, it would be like a qualifying event. Anytime you're having a qualifying event, think about updating your estate documents.
Yeah. And I think that's the one thing, like, as I went through my estate planning process, it's like having those real conversations with family members and spouses.
Yeah.
I know I had to have a conversation with my best friend and my mother, like, hey, if something happens to me, here's a copy of the trust and the will, all the documents that you need. But also one thing is, hey, here's the passcodes, the passwords to this, that. Here's these documents. Here's the passports. Here's the birth certificate, like all those things. And I think sometimes, some of us forget about that. You know, we get this document or, this entity. Oh, I got me a trust. I got me a will. And I remember, someone told me, like, if you don't fund your trust, that means put things, in the trust name, that is not it's a real thing, but it's just a dead thing. You know what I mean? Can you speak a little bit to that? Like, actually doing the work to get things in motion from like, hey, this is in this name, or funding the trust.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll talk to both things. I mean, I think you just brought up something that I think is really important, really meaningful, right? Like getting the other people the information that they need to the passwords, the codes, the things, right? And we don't really think about this like this, but you carry around the stress of having all those things to yourself all the time when it's just you. And you're like, oh man, if something happened, or if there was an emergency, and you're like, oh my goodness, they couldn't get into X to take care of Y, right? So you want to make sure you document those things and that you talk through with the people that, are going to step into those roles. You do this, you do that. This is how you access this thing. This is what happens here. Same thing with your trust, right? So you can have a really well-developed, beautifully designed, well-written trust, but if you don't have any of the assets in the trust, then it's not doing you any good. And so for real estate, we normally create a deed to put the real estate into the trust. We want to do things like, if you have life insurance policies, making the trust the beneficiary. If you have, bank accounts, make the trust the beneficiary so that should something happen to you, those assets can flow into the trust. And now the people who are your trustees can now begin utilizing those assets. There's nothing more painful than hearing the story about a person who, passed away with lots of money in the bank, and the people still had to go, ask all their friends and family for money for the funeral. And there's money sitting there waiting, ready to be used, but they have to go through the probate process or some other step to be able to obtain it, right? Wow. And so, make sure that you put the pieces in so that folks can make use of the, the assets that you have in place for them.
That's awesome. And I'm happy that you talked about that. It's like that extra step to make sure you got everything buttoned up just in the case if something happens. So I know we kind of talk about family and the people, our family and friends. Like, what advice would you have to someone that's like kind of on the fence, like, hey, family, I want to start this estate planning, but like, what advice would you have for them on how to start those conversations, or just even the thought process around this stuff?
Yeah. So this is the honest advice, right?
Oh, yeah.
It sounds a little self-serving.
Okay.
But it's honest and real, right?
Hit me up.
Right? Start the journey with an attorney.
Yes.
Right? Start the journey with an attorney. And this is the reason why I say that. I've seen so many different people who are like, oh man, this is important. I need to do this. And then they start their round of internet research, right? And they're on Google, and they're reading all the articles, and then they're getting advice from ChatGPT, and they're getting all the information that they want, but it just stays information, right? True. Right. And so let your knowledge lead to action, right? So you can schedule a consultation with me or any other attorney out there, and then do your research on the road to your consultation, right? But you've taken an action step that will take you closer to getting the thing done. The biggest challenge and the biggest thing that I see a lot of people make a mistake on is they think about it and they think about it and they think about it and they think about it. And then life throws them a curveball, right? There's a car accident. They have the diagnosis. They have the injury that causes them to be in the hospital. And then they're like, oh God, I wish I had gotten my plan done. And they're calling me from the hospital trying to see if I can do a Zoom meeting with them, right? Which I'll still do, right? We'll still get it done, right? Yeah. We work with people in those circumstances when the situation gets tough and the challenges are hard. We're still there, right? But like with the tree analogy, right? The best time to plant the tree is now.
True. Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, look, if it's on your mind, right? Schedule the time. And this is the last thing. You're not going to get better information from Google than you are sitting down with an estate attorney who does this all day long, who is their specialty area, and who's going to sit down and give you all the insights and all the advice and all the counsel that you really need. And so I should throw one last caveat in here. This isn't legal advice right now.
Yes, no legal advice.
This is information, knowledge, insight. Although if you'd want to get in touch and you sit down with an estate attorney, they will be able to give you specific legal advice and counsel.
Yeah. No, and that's important. Like, and I think that's the one thing when I started my journey is like, let me just talk to someone. Like, it's to your point. I'm one of those people. I'm gonna go to ChatGPT. I'm gonna Google. I'm a YouTube, and I'm like, oh crap! And now I need to make a move.
Right.
So that's half the battle is making a move.
Right. And Googling, YouTube, ChatGPT, those are all still appropriate things to do. Right. I just say sequence it different. Normally, we want to do all that stuff, get all this knowledge, and then make an appointment with somebody. And I'm like, oh, just make the appointment with the person so that you have an action on the calendar, and then still do all your research, right? Walk into your meeting knowledgeable, make sure that someone's not going to put the wool over your eyes and try to sell you something that doesn't make any sense.
True. So, we talked about some of the words, wills, trust, power of attorney. I know there's another word out there, trustee.
Yeah.
What does trustee mean? Can you explain that? And what are some common mistakes people make when they're selecting their trustees?
Oh, good question. All right. So the trustee is the person who will manage your trust. Okay. So when you create a trust, you'll set up a person who will manage it. So for a lot of times when we create trust for somebody, the first trustee of the trust is you, right? You'll continue to manage the assets, do the things with it that they're supposed to happen, right? And then we set up what we call successor trustees, people who will serve as trustee when you are no longer able to. If that means if you're incapacitated or if you're no longer with us and have gone on to be with the Lord, then there's someone there to make sure that your things are taken care of. And so that person's job is to manage and take care of the assets, to get those assets to the people that you said they're supposed to go to, right? That's their job. They act really in a way that's really similar to someone who's an executor of a will, right? They're handing out and distributing the assets, right? And they're holding and managing them for assets that you're like, they're supposed to stay in this trust a little bit longer, right? The last thing that they do is they keep people who are the beneficiaries of your trust informed, right? The beneficiaries are the people who are supposed to receive those assets. The trustee keeps them informed. Here's what happened this year with all the assets that were in the trust. This is where they went. This is where they are now. Here's what you can expect in the coming year. So that's really the job of a trustee. The common things that are missteps in selecting a trustee. We always encourage people when you're selecting a trustee, select somebody that you actually trust, right?
Right.
They're carrying out a really important job for you.
How do you put it that way? Right. Trust them, please.
Yeah. So it needs to be somebody you trust, right? Someone who you think is responsible. It helps a lot when you think they're also good with money and good with handling assets. That's a big plus. Right. But at the end of the day, you need someone who you can feel pretty confident that like they're willing to carry out the wishes you have, that they'll care about the values that you care about. And they don't have to be 100% like they think the way you think, right? Yeah. But they're willing enough to follow what you've asked for them to do. Yeah. Right. That's the big thing. One of the big challenges I see people run into is like, hey, I want to be really fair. And so, I want all my kids to be the trustees, right? 2 kids or 3 kids or 5 kids, whatever it is, right? I don't want anyone to feel left out. And it's like, well, I normally encourage clients in those scenarios like, well, wait a second, like you're asking for somebody to make decisions with your things and to distribute it. And is it easier for one person to make a decision than 5 people? Right. Yeah. If a full committee is trying to make a decision about every single thing, it might be kind of difficult. And so I have seen scenarios in which multiple kids were set up as the trustees, and it just turned into an absolute nightmare.
Wow. I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about how siblings fight just in normal circumstances.
Yeah.
Right. People really underestimate how much that their presence is a stabilizing force for their family. And so in any event, you can still do multiple people who are trustees, but you need to make sure you have a setup and a game plan for who makes the decision. If none of them can come to an agreement, how do they still make the call?
Ooh-wee. That sounds like a very complicated situation, but it kind of goes back to the point, like, start the conversation now.
Right.
Because if you wait to, you know, Mama May is on her deathbed or Big Papa is there, that's too late. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So you need that time to grieve and allow whatever the person put in place for people to follow, just to follow that stuff. So I love that. I love that. So you kind of touched on kids. I know for me, one of the things that I have in my will or trust, like I said, I always get the words confused, is a guardian for my daughter.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people know I'm in a co-parenting situation. So if something happens to me, of course, it goes to my ex-wife and vice versa in her estate plan. But however, one of the things we had to talk about, what happens if something happens to both of us?
Yeah.
Who does Savannah go to?
Yeah.
So what advice would you have when people are thinking about guardians of kids if something happens to them or their spouse?
Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought this up, right? So, we want to make selections about potential successor guardians when you are putting together your will, when you are putting together your powers of attorney. Those are important things to think about if you have minor kids. The factors we want to think about and how we counsel clients through kind of considering, is normally think about things like, who has and who shares your values, right? Who's going to use a parenting style that you think is appropriate and matches the parenting style that you and your spouse or your co-parent have had with your children, right? You want to think about like who has a level of financial stability. They don't need to be rich and famous, but they do need to have a level of financial stability because they need to support your kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And they need to be ideally able to continue to pass along some of the financial values that you would want your child to have.
I like that.
We think a little bit about age and stage of life. I wouldn't pick for my basketball team the person who can't make it up and down the court. And when I think about my kids, I have 4 kids, ages 3, 5, 8, 15, right? So I need somebody who can keep up with a 3-year-old who can run all day long and jump all day long and play all day long, right? And so you want to think about like, hey, who can kind of keep up with these guys, and who can bring that energy?
Maybe not the great aunt that's down the street can keep up with the 3-year-old. Right. Maybe a sibling or a close friend that's within the same age group. That is a really good point.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, but that's a really good point.
Yeah. So those are typical factors we try to help people think about.
That's awesome, man. And I think, man, like this, we talk about this off camera. Like this stuff is so important. It's very tedious.
Yep.
On the other, of course, you probably don't think this, but the receiving end of the services, it is boring. But like I said, it's important. Like I think the boring stuff when it relates to personal finance are the most important things, like estate planning, insurance, debt management, all those things. Not the sexy thing. Oh, I make all this money. I got all these lines of and streams of income. But if you don't protect that,
right,
it's hard to take it to that next level and scale that wealth.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up though, because we've heard a lot of that feedback, right? It's tedious, it's boring, it's painstaking. I'm all over my house in my basement trying to gather up papers from the last 3 decades, right? So what we did was this. Our firm is about making estate planning easy.
I love
that. And so we looked through every part of the process, every part of the pipeline, every part of the client journey to figure out like, hey, do you need that part? You know what? That's kind of a waste of time. Hey, this thing right here, every attorney asks for this, but no attorney does anything with it. Right. What can we make in this? How can we make this process as simple and straightforward and as streamlined as possible? And we did everything we could to cut cut down on the front end how much work you have to do to still get the best possible outcome for you and your family. And so for us now, it's pretty compact for folks who are working with us. The pathway is this, right? We have our initial conversation with the person to do some learning and understanding about them, some high level things, right? We send out a little survey. The person takes it. The survey looks like it's going to take them years, right? But then when they get into it, they're like, oh, this is going to take me like 15, maybe 20 minutes, right? Because they're only filling out the stuff that's relevant to them and their family and their situation. We just had to make sure the survey was comprehensive enough to capture all the different people's different types of circumstances. But it takes people 20 to 30 minutes to fill out the information. They sit back down with us just to make sure we understand and can affirm, hey, do we understand your goals and what you care about and how this works for you? Okay, great. Well, sit back and relax and we'll be back. Yeah. Right. We put things together. It usually takes us a couple of weeks to make sure everything's buttoned up for them. We're working hard to try to cut down more and more of the time so you get it in your hands faster. We get your first draft, and then we would expect when you get your first draft that you probably won't understand the dozens and dozens of pages that you have. So we sit back down with you, right? Usually takes us 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Sit back down. We walk you through page by page, thing by thing, tool by tool, what's going to happen, make sure that you're good. Right. And if you feel good at the end of that, then we button everything up and you have yourself your final estate plan. Last thing, we've been encouraging clients, we've created something brand new called our family harmony planning. Right. And we created this because I read a statistic that I hated, which the statistic was that about 30% of estate plans just totally fail. And the reason why those estate plans fail are because the people didn't understand how the plans worked. And then the people that they selected as fiduciaries, their trustees, the guardians, they weren't really aware and didn't understand what their duties and their job were. So I'm like, what an easy thing for us to try to help fix. So we created and opened up what we call our family harmony planning. And so in this, it's really just an opportunity for us to sit down with the people you selected to do a job in your estate plan, and potentially the people who you selected as your beneficiaries, to make sure that they understand, what are you supposed to do? When this thing happens, who do you call? What do you do? What's your next step? How do you do this? How do you do that? Right? So that people know what they're doing. They can execute on a game plan, right? Hey, beneficiaries. So I read this article a couple of years ago, right? About Warren Buffett and his estate planning. And I'm like, does anyone think that Warren Buffett is just like off in a room by himself with his attorneys, right? And they're writing up all the documents and they just, go out in the world. I'm like, I'm finding out about what's in Warren Buffett's estate plan, right?
Yeah, like a mad scientist.
Yeah, but his thing, he was explaining, he's like, hey, before we sign the final documents, I gather all my kids into the room, right? We sit there and we just talk through like what's going on in the plan. How does this thing work? Wow. How do people feel about the transfer of this asset? What happens here? And I think, hey, if I should learn a lesson from somebody, maybe it's Uncle Warren, right? And we encourage our families that we work with to do the same thing. Hey, sit down in the room together, right? Talk through what it's going to look like. If people have disputes, figure out the dispute now instead of after you're gone and they're fighting each other about it, right? We want the plans to work. So that's why we do family harmony planning now.
I love that, because to that point, you and your staff can serve as that independent party. Hey, I'm just helping you guys. And like you said earlier, like, some of the stuff get messy far as the family dynamics, but working with the right team, the right attorney can allow a lot of those dynamics to kind of, minimize. Like, let's just focus on what's important, not the emotions of everything. So
right.
That is awesome, man. I can't wait to see more about that.
Yeah, for
we
sure.
might have to partner on a little. I got a couple ideas with that one.
Yeah.
So in closing, what tips, advice, or just things on your heart that you want to share to the people about just estate planning and just getting that ball rolling?
Yeah. All right. So there's probably two things. I'll break them into two categories, right? Okay. A couple of things are a couple of myths that I want to bust while I have the chance to sit here in front of folks, right? And then a couple of things that I encourage people to take steps to take forward to make it all happen and make it all work.
Absolutely.
Right? So common myths that I get, people say, hey, I'm not rich and famous, so I don't need to do estate planning. Like, no, it's not true. You live on this earth, right? There are things common to us, right? We're all here. At some point in time, we all won't be here. And there's a variety of things that can happen between a start and an ending. And so you want to be prepared all along the way for all the different curveballs life can throw. So, get the planning done. Another myth, hey, my kids get along. right? So I don't need to worry about being specific for them in their game plan, right? Well, people underestimate how much of a glue they are for the stability on the inside of their family. And so when you're not there, you are an incredibly powerful stabilizing force for your kids, even if they live on two opposite sides of the country, right? And so if you're not specific and if you don't give them good, strong guidance, then things can go awry. So rather than just trust that everyone's just going to figure it out without you about your stuff and your things and your care, be specific. Be as thoughtful and mindful as you possibly can to put a good game plan in place. Talk with them through it if you need to. Work with them through it if you need to. But don't just assume because they're happy and they're kind and everyone talks and gets along together that, you know, everything will continue to work out later on. You know, I use the Thanksgiving or Christmas test, right? You know, what's the picture of what things look like when you're gone? Do you want to make sure that the family is still coming together at Thanksgiving, right? The people still love each other, want to sit down together for big celebrations through the year. You know, do you want to make sure that, you know, people's major goals in life can continue to progress and go on, right? Which means you might need to make a plan so that someone can access funds for school or if someone can access funds for a first home or to launch a business, right? You know, what do you want things to continue to look like while you're here? And how do you want the picture to continue to look if you weren't able to be here, right? And now we have to plan, right? That just won't happen always by itself, right? Very few things in life happen just oops, everyone got together and they were really happy and wealthy, right?
Yeah.
By mistake, right? It doesn't normally happen
intentional.
by mistake, right? It's not on default. You have to plan, right? So we encourage people do the planning, right? So the you know biggest encouragement for folks into the future and the biggest tip and advice is sit down with somebody, right? Sit down with a professional. Sit down with an attorney. We'd love it if it's us, but it doesn't have to be us. But sit down with somebody to figure out what is it that you have, what don't you have, what do you need, right? And what's the appropriate game plan for you and the people that you love, right? You know, the thing I think a lot about is this. You know, if something were to happen, right, how do you guarantee or come as close to guaranteeing as you could possibly come to making sure that everybody that you love is still going to be just fine. They'll be okay. They'll continue to have the resources and the supports that they need, the things that you've accrued, they get, right? And they won't have to go through a big, huge sit-down slugfest in the probate court of whatever jurisdiction you live in to make it all happen, right? So those are the things we think a lot about. And if I had to give the biggest possible tip, it'd be find a way to take an action as soon as you can take one.
I love that. And that's exactly right. So if someone, you know, wanted to get in contact with you and learn more about your services, how can they do that?
Yeah. So I'll give you my phone number and my firm. So my firm's name is McKenzie Law LLC, right? McKenzie Law LLC. We're located here in Central Ohio, but we serve people all across the state. You can reach us by phone at 614-641-0072. You can look us up on our website at McKenzieLawLLC.com. And then if you needed another means, then our friends here at Frugal Freddy always have all the information, all the insight, and all the connections that you could possibly want and need. So, you know, if you...
I didn't pay him to say that.
You couldn't connect me directly, then my homie here has the information always. But yeah, those are the simplest and quickest ways to get a hold of me. We can set up time for a quick appointment. We can do consultations for folks. It's free. But we want to make sure that people can get the plans in place that they need.
That's
and
awesome.
I haven't shared this with anyone else.
Oh,
all right. So this is an exclusive. You know, we'd also want to offer for folks who will share that they heard about it through your podcast for the faithful followers of Frugal Freddy. We do have sort of special advantages and special packages and set up for folks who are faithful followers and faithful viewers of the podcast and of the work you do. We're big supporters of Frugal Freddy and the work that you do to make sure that people have the information they need, that they're educated and they're connected. And so we want to honor the hard work that you've been doing to get the information, the education out there.
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
That is definitely a surprise to me. But no, man, thanks for coming on the show. Like I said, this information is so important for everyone out there to learn about. Estate planning is vital to your financial success. So, like Ashon said, reach out to him, hit me up. I can connect you with him. And I'm very, very adamant about getting estate plans out there, make it a sexy thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So, with that, see y'all until the next episode.